Well, welcome. It is great to be with you this morning. My name is Noah Tyler. I'm the lead pastor here at Westmark. If we haven't had the honor to meet, I'm really glad to meet you. Now, on the outset, I do want to clarify, because I've heard some comments. It's peach, okay? It's not pink. It's a peach. It's a masculine peach, I think is the name of the shade. You can just picture a really buff peach, big biceps peach. Now, I do want to be aware of a couple things. One, you probably have plans today. Number two, there's probably a subset of us in here that don't really want to be in here. And we got tricked into being here because we can't get to lunch until we come here. And I get that. It's okay. I probably told them to tell you that. I want to be aware that not everybody wants to sit and listen to a speech about pink versus peach, but you're going to. Just to back up my approach to this, I looked up some figures, looked up some stats. The longest speech ever given, Guinness Book of World Records, 2 days, 5 hours, and 18 minutes. 20 seconds. You and me, brother, we're breaking that record. I'm just saying, nobody in here, I'm sure you don't have plans till Wednesday. We can do this, all right? We can put Westmark on the map. No, that's ridiculous for a couple reasons. One, it's ridiculous because sermons as a whole, which, by the way, that is a surprise to all of us, that it wasn't just a speech, it was a sermon. Some of you are like, yeah, I used to go to that church. Sermons are not meant to just give you as much information as possible, not as meant to just keep you in your seat as long as possible. Really, the point of a sermon is change. It's to be changed. The point of a sermon is to open God's word to say, all right, if this is true, then it should mean something to me. If this is true and it actually has authority, then it should change how I live. It should change me. I actually think that Easter, as a central point of our faith, exemplifies this more than anything else. That really, Easter changes everything about life. And it's true, it changes everything about your life, but it changes everything about life as a whole. I actually think that if what I'm saying is true, that sermons are meant to put us in a position where we have to change. If this is true, that Easter puts us in front of this fact about Jesus' resurrection, Jesus coming back to life, that makes us make a decision, it's actually going to change everything about your life. It's going to change how you look at relationships. It's going to change how you look at the world around you. It's going to change how you view yourself. If Easter really is true, it's going to change what you fear and what you hope in. It changes your ideologies, your philosophies. If this really is true, it's going to change what you find fulfillment in. It's going to change where you're headed in life. One of the many reasons that I'm glad you're here this morning is because Easter is the central point of the Christian faith. And this is what that means. You could have Easter, right? And you got wraps on it. You know what? You know Easter. You get it. Jesus died. Jesus came back to life. This is the Son of God. I trust in it. You could have Easter, and you can be a Christian. You can be in the family of God with Easter. And if you were to take away Easter and have everything else, and have all the books, and have all the stories, and have all the people, and know all the languages, and have all the background, and everything else you can imagine, all the sacraments, all the everything, but you didn't have Easter, you wouldn't make it. What you have would be hollow. It wouldn't be enough. So that means that today is pretty important. That Easter as a whole is something that we need to understand. Easter can change everything about your life. So we need to focus on it this morning. We need to pay attention to it. On Friday, we had our Good Friday gathering. We were able to focus on what Good Friday means. That's really more towards the beginning of this Easter, right? Easter's the day Jesus came back to life. Good Friday's when he died. And what we discussed in that time was actually that Good Friday was a part of the story, but it actually isn't the start of the story at all. And we took it one step. We could take more, but we took one step back further, and we realized that Lazarus, a friend of Jesus who died, and he came and he raised Lazarus from the dead, that really was the beginning of this fight with death, kind of going the final rounds. Jesus came to Lazarus' tomb, who had been dead 4 days, and he called Lazarus out. And when he did that, he was entering into a fight with death. He began the fight with Lazarus, and he ended the fight with his own death. He won. This is why it's important. Because when Jesus came to that tomb, and he was angry, and he was heartbroken, which if you've lost someone to death, you know that's the experience. You know that's what that feels like. This thing taking from you what it shouldn't. This death overreaching and disrupting life. It's upsetting. It hurts. It feels just in our core that this isn't how it's supposed to be. And Jesus felt that. And he met with tears. And he met it with anger. And he said, enough. Which that's pretty fascinating because if you think about it, death has been a reality that nobody else has argued with. Death has been just this authority in life, right? That it just comes and it goes and we really can't control it and we can't really argue with it. It just kind of happens and we try to avoid it as much as we can. But most of your life is actually controlled by death. You think about how you spend your time, where you go, what you do, who you have relationships with, how you're going to save money, what you're going to eat. A lot of these things, in one way or another, actually are connected to this thought that death is coming. How can I avoid it? How can I make that distance as great as possible? How can I be prepared? And Jesus steps into the ring with death, and he disrupts this authority. Now, death has authority for a couple of reasons. One of them is that when God created the world and he created you and me and he put us here, he said, this is good. And we took that order and we mangled it. We broke it. And within that gash and within those mess, that car wreck that we turned creation into, sin seeped in. And it spread like an infection. And here's the deal. Sin always produces death. Sin produces separation. If you think about it, that's a great way to consider this, that this germ of sin, it infects and it grows until you're separated from the order, from the things that are good, from the people who love you. It separates. And then it takes us in death. That's what happens. It disrupts how we view God. It disrupts how we view ourselves. It disrupts how we view each other. That infection grows until eventually it kills us. Until Jesus walked in and said, that's actually not who has the final say. There's a greater authority. Good Friday is good because Jesus can pull us out from underneath that authority. Good Friday is good because he shows us that it doesn't have to be lived that way. Life doesn't have to be lived only avoiding death. There's more. I've heard it put it this way, that man asserts himself against God and puts himself where only God deserves to be. God sacrifices himself for man and puts himself where only man deserves to be. When Jesus died on the cross, he paid the payment. He paid the payment. And this is what that means. When you're underneath a payment, it has control over you. When you're underneath a debt, right? Yeah, shout out to whoever's in crippling debt, right? High five. Relatable. When you're under that debt, When you owe something, it has control over you. At least to a certain, financially, that's an easy thing to say, but think about being in prison. You owe this debt of time, and until then, you're not in control. Death has that type of authority over us. We made mistakes. We chose wrong things. And when we did that, we incurred a punishment. Now we deserve this punishment. Now we're under this authority of death. And when Jesus died, he frees us from that. When we are in Christ, when what he did is applied to us, it frees us. That's what it means to be forgiven. It means to be set free. That's why Good Friday is good. That's why this cross up here, the symbol of Christianity, is an instrument of death. And that's weird. Until you realize it was because of his death, it was because of his sacrifice, where he stepped into what we deserve. And he gave us what we didn't. Good news gets better. The good news gets better because Easter morning shows us that there's more to life than waiting to die. That life in and of itself has a greater purpose. And I want you to imagine what it would feel like to discover someone who could overpower death. We're going to be in John 20, and this is the story. It's a real-time experience of several people discovering that Jesus can overcome death, that he is the greater authority. I want to show you that that person is Jesus. John 20, we're going to be going through the first 18 verses here. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. Now, John, in the book of John, he's going to describe himself that way. It's like sort of just this low-key brag about like, Jesus is his best friend. I'm the beloved one. I don't know. He's going to kind of insert himself. Now, you got to understand that because he's going to call himself the one Jesus loved or the other disciple. And if you don't know who he's talking about, it gets confusing. And the one Jesus loved and said, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb and we don't know where they've put him. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him and I'll get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. There are hundreds of thousands of hours, pages and pages and pages of people explaining what this means, what this changes. That looking at this truth, that Jesus came back to life, what that means is, and diving into how it changes everything about life. And we could dive in and go as deep as we wanted to. Like, think about this. It changes everything going forward, but it also changes everything looking backward. You know Bible stories, right? Sunday school stories? Like Jonah and the whale. It's a good one. I remember one Sunday school teacher I had explained that Jonah to me is like, well, if you don't obey, you get eaten by a monster. It's like, very good. Pay attention, kids. Pay attention. Here's Jesus in the belly of the beast for 3 days, overcoming our disobedience. What about Moses? Moses, the great leader of Israel, that's going to lead his people out of slavery to Egypt and into this promised land. And Jesus shows himself as the greater Messiah, the greater Moses, who leads his people from the slavery of sin into the promised land of fellowship with God. What about Joseph? Right? Joseph, the Technicolor coat. You know Joe. Joseph was elevated and he's sold into slavery, but God protects him and brings him up, puts him in this position in Egypt. He's over, and God placed him so that he would be able to provide during the famine for God's people. He's the only reason that Israel survived. And here you have Jesus coming and saying, I go to prepare a place for you. What about David? You know, David and Goliath, punk kid with a slingshot. He's the chosen son from the chosen line who stands up to defeat this evil. And here we have Jesus, the chosen son from the chosen line, who will also be king, standing up to defeat this evil. We could spend all day doing this. There's puzzle piece after puzzle piece. You think through the 10 Commandments, where God outlined, this is the holy way to live. If you live this way, if you kind of follow my design, you're going to understand this is how I designed it to work. And then we have Jesus come and fulfill the law. Live it out perfectly. You have a temple where sacrifice needed to be. This is how you come between God and man, this system, this setup. And we can't really fully get there. There's a divide, there's a curtain. But I'm going to create some way that we can foster this relationship temporarily between God and man. And Jesus comes, tears the curtain. He says, I've made the way. Or the Passover lamb. Maybe you're familiar with this, where they would keep this lamb. And it had to die. And its blood was put over the door. And if they had not done that, then the oldest son of that house would have died. And here you have the firstborn, perfect Lamb of God, sacrificing himself so that he'd be firstborn of the dead and firstborn into new life. So you realize Easter changes everything. When you look back now, the whole storyline of the Bible makes sense. It all clicks together. This is not some random guy who can happen to bring people back from the dead. This is what it's all been about. And as you connect these stories, you realize this forces you to make a decision about your life now. If it changes everything in the past, it certainly is going to change everything for your future. And that's sort of Mary's experience here, I think, where she comes and it doesn't quite make sense. This isn't how I viewed the world at all. I've always experienced that we live and we just kind of try to avoid death, and then death happens and that's it. And that's the understanding I have about all of existence. And Jesus interrupts that. And he forces Mary to make a decision. Not that she understands everything, not that she can clearly articulate this is how everything works all the time. I get it completely. No. But this part is still true. It's going to change how she views Jesus. And if you think about it, There's no way that your whole life is progressing and building and leading up to nothing. I don't think that's happening at all. I think that your life is progressing and building and up to this moment, up to a time where you have to make a decision based on this truth. Jesus did come back from the dead, and that might not make sense to you, but it doesn't mean it's not true. And when he asks you to follow him, you have to trust him. That's really what Easter is about. That's really how it's going to change your life is you step out in trust. You step out in faith because today God is offering to change you. Will you trust him? That might be the first thing that you've ever experienced in this Christian walk. You're like, this is not me. I've never really experienced it. I don't know what you're talking about fully. But you also could have been a Christian for your entire life. And there's more. There's more. On the other side of this chain of freedom, of slavery, there's freedom. There's more. Are you guys familiar with love languages? The way love languages work is two people, there's different ones, and then you have to find someone who has a different one than you and marry them. And it's the rules. And so we're no exception. Caitlin and I, we have different ones, and it's terrible. I'm gifts, right? I like to give gifts, and she hates to receive them. Yeah, it's fine. You can laugh. My life's a joke. And she likes quality time. So I'm like, hey, here's this. She's like, what do I do with that? She's like, let's hang out. I'm like, I got stuff to do. And it's really fun. So love languages are funny. Now, she tries. I'll give her credit. She tries. I can remember one time, birthday present, she gives me this mug that she made, and it's all decorated. She painted onto it and then baked it, and it's got all these designs, and it's like, live each day like your last, and I was like, oh, thanks, and I drink the coffee, and then at the bottom in bold letters it says, you've been poisoned. So, then I died. Open casket, masculine peach shirt, the whole deal. I think the way you've been living is poisoned. I think the way that you've been approaching life leads to death. And you may delay it in this way or that. You may find good ways to patch things together, and that's okay. That's true. There's still goodness in this world, but that doesn't mean it's not infected. What you need is someone who can rescue you. What you need is someone who can pay the debt off for you, that can forgive you from what has happened in the past and can welcome you into a new future. That old life is gone and paid for, and this new life is rich. It's close to God. And there's healing, and there's joy. And it doesn't mean it's easy, but it's real. It's real. Maybe you hear this story and you sort of identify with one of the characters. I can see in here 3 different characters. I see 3 different realizations of Jesus. Maybe you're the Peter type. And Peter, he's right in there, Jesus is alive? What? Where? All right, let's check it out. And he runs in there and he busts through I guess there's no door, right? The stone moved away. But he gets in there and he's looking around, and sometimes it's that simple. Sometimes it's me explaining to you, Jesus loves you. He died for you. Come on. And you're like, yeah, I'm in. Let's go to Utah. I'm in. You're there. For a lot of us, that's an experience we have. For some of us, it's this more slower. I see John in this type where he comes right up to the edge. And it says he stops. And you can almost see the wheels turning in his head, and he sees the cloth. He's trying to understand. And I think a lot of people live their life this way. They come up to the edge, and they just want to wait for something else. As if they specifically deserve some sort of miracle for God to push them through the door. But that's not what John does. He stops, and he does think. He is thoughtful. And I think he's trying to figure out what this means. It was confusing enough that Jesus died, but now he's back to life. That's pretty confusing as well. But then it says, he went in, and he saw, and he believed. And for you, that might be a process of opening the Word, being around the church family where they can answer questions, and you learn. And I promise, the more you learn, the more it's going to make sense. The more you're going to realize this isn't an accident, this isn't just jumbled stories. This is God working over thousands of years intentionally for this moment. And he knows you, and he loves you. He saw, and he believed. And within that, you might actually identify a little bit more with Mary. Mary, who is lost, and she's confused, and she's bewildered, and she's hurt. She just lost this person she loved. And then the body's gone, and so she's kind of like she's losing him again, and she's lost. And she's hurt, and she's been trying to do things, and it just isn't really working. Trying her best. And Jesus calls her name. She even interacts with Jesus before realizing what's happening, and then he calls her name. And I wonder if this morning that's what's happening for you. That he's calling your name. Not to stand at the door, not to fake it, not to just sit in your hurt and confusion. Well, I'll try this and I'll try that and I'll do the next thing and maybe I can distract from it and maybe he calls your name and says, listen. Listen. Easter changes everything about your life. And what's crazy about that is that this morning, if he's calling your name, I want to ask you the same question that the angels asked. Who are you looking for? In all these pursuits, you have a full day. You have a full day every day. You're spending time and energy and money, all this. Who are you looking for? Someone to make you feel safe? Someone who can actually provide some sense of security? Maybe you're looking for some depth of meaning. Someone that would kind of unlock who it is you're supposed to be. Maybe you're searching for somebody who's going to be able to help you build to reach that real purpose. Someone you can trust. How about someone who knows who you are and would still die for you? Someone who would invite you into new life, a better life. I want you to see Jesus as that person. That's why Easter changes everything. And now that you may not be fully convinced. You may not be able to walk out and do whatever and change everything in life. I'm asking for one step. One more step. See if he is who he says he is. It may be just as simple as coming back next week. We actually did this on purpose in that we aligned. Can you go to the, thank you. We actually did this on purpose in that we aligned the next series to be really tied to this one. Because if Easter changes everything about your life, the first place you're going to probably notice that is in your relationships. It's going to be in how you form friendships and what they mean. It's going to be in what marriage is supposed to be in your life. It's going to be in how you want to design your family, whether right now or down the road. As a single person all the way to a grandparent, you have places in the family And you need to know what they're supposed to look like. It's important because if those things are going to change, if Easter changes everything about your life, then it's going to take you taking one more step. And so it may just be coming back next week and giving it a shot where you normally wouldn't. It also might just be this sense of true, honest confession. Could you take a moment today to actually sit? It can be quiet. You can be alone. It could be during this final song we're going to sing together, where you actually confess to God, God, I need you because of the mess I'm in. I'm under death. I'm under sin, and I can't get out. But I trust you to get me there. I trust you to rescue me. I trust in what Easter means, that Jesus died, defeated sin, came back to life. Imagine, just imagine what that would be like to experience that kind of life. In a moment, we're going to witness some baptisms. And baptism really is this perfect picture of people stepping out in obedience to say, this is what happened to me, new life happened to me. It's a real change, and I want to represent that. It's a true thing. It's an expression of how Easter has changed everything about their life. That's what that means. And I want you to imagine what God could do with your life if you're willing to give up the struggle and accept his help, accept his new life for you. By golly, we did it with 2 days and 4 hours left.